When I started injecting opiates in 2001, one of my close friends was scoring from a guy named Don. They worked together in this building. At the time, it was a telemarketing office. Eventually, I wanted access to my own supply, so my friend introduced me to Don on this sidewalk during a lunch break. Don was a small native man with large features. He had big, smiling eyes. His dark hair flowed down to his waist, and his black mustache was surrounded by stubble. His body seemed mismatched, like the head and hands of a large native man were attached to a tiny frame. His voice was deep and loud, and the low rumble was often interrupted by burps and hiccups. He shook my hand, and I noticed his was slick with sweat. Don was almost always moist with perspiration. I wiped my hand on my pants as he turned around to introduce his wife, Debbie. During those years, Don and Debbie did everything together. Whether it was working, selling drugs, or smoking crack, they always did it together. Don would take the money while Debbie slipped the pills out of her bra. One of them would watch their stuff while the other scored some rock. For them, it was a team sport. After being introduced at the office, I found myself running up to their apartment quite often. Like many people who abuse crack or meth, their apartment was a library of garbage. Stacked from floor to ceiling and blocking the door, it left only a narrow gap for the thin frame of a cocaine user to squeeze through. Once inside, my eyes would scan the objects, all of which blended together like the items in a landfill. But one thing always caught my eye, a single photograph propped on a mantle. It was a native woman with thick makeup and the glitzy dress and boa of a nightclub singer. The image seemed familiar, but I couldn't place it. Don and Debbie eventually had to move because of unpaid rent. They always followed the same routine, missing rent payments until served with an eviction notice. They knew exactly how long they could stay until the law showed up. All of these buildings are places Don and Debbie lived over the 12 years I knew them. I knocked on all these doors hundreds of times. One night, much later than usual, I needed to score, so I made the trip over in the pouring rain. I walked up the 3 stories of this building, and as I reached their apartment door, it swung open and revealed the same native woman I had seen in the picture. Dawn, the very masculine native, with a mustache and stubble, was standing there in a sequined dress, feather boa, thick eyeliner, mascara, rouge, and lipstick. For a moment, I thought I was standing across from someone else, until Don's voice confirmed it was him. He acted like nothing was different from the 100 other times I had been there to score. I knew Don a long time after that, and he never indicated any desire to change his sex. He was just a guy who dressed up like a chick and sold sexual favors while doing so. That's all it ever was to him. Things changed over the years, and we slowly drifted apart. When I ran into Debbie at the methadone clinic, after not seeing either of them for a long time, she told me they had broken up. Debbie had grown tired of the drug-fueled lifestyle. Sometime later, I heard through the grapevine that Don was living at these apartments on Jackson Street. One day I happened to be in the neighborhood, so I paid him a visit. I arrived to find Debbie in the apartment. Don had a mattress on the living room floor, and Debbie had her stuff in the bedroom. Don's pride had long since been stripped away, so he felt no shame in telling me about his cancer, or that Debbie had moved in to take care of him. He still looked healthy enough, but the disease was spreading rapidly. Debbie had begun her adult life as a nurse, and knew better than most what the disease was capable of. One minute you're a person, the next you're a patient. I told them I would visit in the near future. I figured it was the least I could do. I know it would make me feel better to have familiar faces around if I was dying. A handful of weeks passed, and I finally made good on my promise. But when I returned, Don had been cut down. It looked like a vampire had drained him. He'd always been a tanned, dark-haired native with large eyes and a thick mustache. Now everything had reversed, and he looked like a demon version of his former self. Gray hair hung from his head in wisps. Clammy white skin was pulled tight over sunken cheeks, and patchy stubble covered the lower half of his face, his mustache having been shaved by Debbie for practical reasons. His starving system had cannibalized his muscles, and he looked more like a skeleton than anyone I've ever seen. Don also suffered from poverty, and cancer is a very different thing for the poor. Canada has a healthcare system that is available to all, but there are many costly things that ease a person's final days. Someone like Don can't afford a taxi to the clinic, medical supplies for his home, mobility, special diets, new medications, or to pay for a support worker. Don was going to waste away in his apartment on a sweaty mattress on the floor. I can only imagine what it would have been like without Debbie there to help. I approached him and said hello. For a moment, I thought I was staring at a corpse until his eyeballs slid sideways. It didn't last long, but he smiled when he recognized me. I've watched a few people waste away, and there's a point at which they could already be considered dead. The light is gone from their eyes, and their mind hums along on autopilot. That was the last time I saw him. He was cremated a few weeks later, and his ashes were given to some relative. I ran into Debbie years later, and she was living quietly on the west side of town. Hopefully she doesn't have to experience the same fate as Don. Don and Debbie had their own experiences, their own traumas, and many crossroads that led them to where they were. They didn't escape the quicksand of addiction, and only kept their heads above the surface by selling drugs. It's easy to judge people like Don and Debbie, but we didn't have to walk their road. Most people do the best they can with what they have at the time.